Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike, and today's show is a little bit different. This actually is going to be an audio broadcast of that show. I just thought it was kind of interesting. As you know, about a month ago, a Texas teenager was given a extremely light sentence for driving drunk and running into and killing 4 individuals and maiming 4 others. So this is my audio podcast of sort of my personal opinion of that situation, and I'm going to put that on now with my friend Mabel the cat. So stay tuned if you're interested. Again, that will be an audio podcast. You can still listen to it if you like, or turn it off. Have a nice day. Hello and welcome to Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. I'm Dr. Mike Kuna, and I'm a board-certified psychiatrist and the Associate Medical Director of Genesis Clinical Services, which is a private psychiatric and psychotherapy clinic in Wheaton, Illinois. This program is dedicated to provide you with useful information on mental health and wellness issues, and it comes to you once a month on the first Sunday of the month. Stay tuned to hear our experts, but remember that their opinion is just that, and it's not a substitute for face-to-face psychiatric or psychotherapy care. Hi, this is Dr. Mike, and today I'm my own guest. And today we're going to talk about the topic of affluenza. This is a term that's been in the news recently, and is it a real term? Is it a made-up term? We're going to discuss that, and I'd like to very strongly state that everything I'm about to say is my personal opinion. So in December 2012, much of the country was shocked when a rich kid was given a very light sentence for doing the following. He stole some alcohol from a Walmart, got drunk and had a blood alcohol level 2.5 times the legal limit. He drove a pickup truck with 7 people in it, a number of them in the bed of the truck. He exceeded the speed limit by 30 miles per hour, and he managed to run over 4 individuals on the side of the road, killing them. And he severely injured 2 of his passengers who apparently were ejected from the truck, one who may have permanent brain damage. And by some reports in the news, he walked away from the incident without showing a lot of remorse or concern. This event happened in Texas, which has strict laws concerning vehicular homicide, including the potential of 20 years in jail. And in fact, if you're a youth that's convicted and you're still serving time, you actually could be transitioned into the adult population, or in other words, the real prison population, when you reach the age of maturity. The defense used a very psychologically sounding rationale why this teen should not have to face consequences that normally would be faced with such a crime, and that they said that he suffered from affluenza, which really is not a psychiatric term at all. It's basically a made-up word. The testifying psychologist for the defense defined this affluenza by stating that the young man had been given so much in his life and therefore never had been given consequences for his past bad behavior. In other words, he should not be punished for something that he didn't realize was wrong. Sort of like a twist on the insanity defense, if you want to think of it in those terms. So instead of receiving a stiff jail sentence, the teen was sentenced to go into treatment for his alcohol and drug addictions, potentially. In this case, it meant that he was supposed to go to a very posh facility for a year. Now, this treatment facility, from what I can tell, has a 90-day or a 3-month treatment program, so you would actually have to convert that, multiply that by 4, and it seems pretty unlikely that they would do that for an individual. I mean, in other words, create an additional 3 times more treatment material for one particular person. But let's say he does do that, that would cost an additional $450,000 for his treatment, which apparently his family was willing to pay. The treatment would include such things as cooking classes, martial art training, nutritional education, and equine, in other words, horse therapy. Naturally, as a substance abuse expert, I'm all for treatment and I'm all for the best treatment that an individual can obtain. However, we're not talking about a simple case of alcoholism. We're talking about a criminal case that involved the death of 4 and the maiming of 2 others. So for that question, we should be asking, is there equal justice for all? Apparently, per news reports, that same judge sentenced a 14-year-old to 10 years in jail when he punched someone and that individual fell, and as a result of the fall, not the punch, the individual died. Apparently, that teen did not have affluenza. Maybe he had poorpox. So where does this term affluenza come from? As far as I can determine, it comes from a book written in 2001 which coined the term as a way of describing consumerism and how the push for more and more leads to an overall dissatisfaction in life. The book defined affluenza as a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste resulting from the dogged pursuit of more. This is quite a different definition than the one used by the defendant's psychologist, but it isn't unusual to create an important or officially sounding word to give authority or impact to an idea or concept. This technique is commonly used in advertising. I was looking at a box of Gain detergent which had the word Freshlock listed on it. What's Freshlock? It's a made-up word. I saw another ad for a shampoo that talked about hydrotherapy hydrating shampoo, which I'm guessing is a play on hydrotherapy, as I'd hate to think that the company was referring to a therapy that involved a mythical sea monster. Another example of a made-up word is the portmanteau nutraceutical that seems to imply that a product has pharmaceutical properties when in fact the word really has no meaning except to make a product sound more medical. One may think that ridiculous legal defenses are new, but they've been used in the past enough to actually group them in a category called Twinkie defenses. This term derived from the famous case where Dan White killed San Francisco officials Harvey Milk and George Moscone. In reality, the defending lawyers in this case weren't blaming the delicious sponge cake, but they were using it to show that White's behavior was changing as he was now eating Twinkies, something that was apparently unusual for him. With that said, making something illogical sound logical has long been the parlance of good hucksters. And this can be seen on late-night TV infomercials or maybe if you go to a state fair. Through the artful use of persuasion, even sophisticated individuals can be convinced that nonsensical things are sensical. You may have a drawer full of perfectly good knives, but the demonstrator at the state fair convinces you that you need to buy some cheaply made cutlery, or during an insomnia bout of late-night infomercials, you may be convinced that you absolutely have to have an absorbent chamois and that it will change your life. However, such hucksterism is best left to mini blenders and absorbent mops, not legal trials. We live in a society of blame. It's always someone else's fault when something goes wrong. If a kid gets a bad grade, it's the teacher's fault. If we spill hot coffee in our lap, it's the fast food restaurant's fault. So when an individual gets drunk, drives a car, and kills and maims others, how could it be their fault? But who to blame? Society, parents, the legal system? Anything is possible if your argument is pitched properly. However, if we say that affluenza is a legitimate defense, the same argument could be made that people raised in poverty should not serve time for stealing, or those individuals who live in high gang areas should be given a pass if they shoot someone because violence was the norm in their neighborhood. Of course, no one would accept such logic. As individuals, we're exposed to many ideas from our parents, teachers, coaches, preachers, media, friends, and communities. We may be taught that we are special or that we transcend the law by our parents, We're also given plenty of opportunities to see opposing evidence that can balance that opinion. We no longer live in a let-them-eat-cake world where the chosen few are completely isolated from the reality of the masses. With that said, do individuals learn right from wrong, or are we born with an intrinsic moral center? The written word often gives us opposing opinions. In humankind, stories like The Good Samaritan are opposing stories like Lord of the Flies, where children turn savage when they are given freedom from the constraints of society. Interestingly, there is evidence that a moral center is strongly influenced by genetics. One of the most well-studied personality disorders is antisocial personality disorder. In this disorder, the individual doesn't have a true concern for right or wrong. They will manipulate others to get their needs met without regard to the cost to the other person. This manipulation could include ingratiating or intimidating the other person. The fact that we know that a person's concerns for others has a strong genetic influence is amazing, as we often think that the understanding of right and wrong is taught, not encoded. With that said, no lawyer would try to defend a sociopath blaming their genetics for committing a crime. If you commit the crime, you do the time. Even if different individuals have their own intrinsic level of moral center, it's possible to build on their core by education and example. Like any other characteristic, some people will be natural learners while others will struggle. As parents, we have a responsibility to help our children when it comes to understanding consequences for their behavior. Just like it is our responsibility to teach them social skills or, for that matter, good hygiene practices. With that said, we all know cases where a child raised in a good home turns out badly, and conversely, we know situations where someone raised in horrific conditions uses their adversity to become a better person. Therefore, who a person is must be the summation of many factors, including genetics, parenting, other social interactions, and even environmental influences. It's because of this complexity that laws are established as they create a line in the sand, offering rules for acceptable levels of behavior. This is where the concept of equal justice for all comes in. Although these rules are clearly established, they are given some wiggle room to allow for exceptions. For instance, a person who kills someone in self-defense is considered differently from a person who kills someone so they can steal their TV set. It is this wiggle room area where clever attorneys can make a clear-cut case less clear-cut. If we go beyond the case of Mr. Couch, there are benefits in understanding the learning components of compassion and the concepts of right and wrong. It's not that long ago that the majority of individuals in our society were in the middle and working classes. Unfortunately, it seems as if these classes are growing smaller, leaving a large gap between the very rich and poor. As this gap widens, it becomes more difficult for each group to identify or empathize with the other, which reduces a necessary component which is involved in building compassion or empathy. We know that in societies where most of the individuals feel secure and connected, that they will have a greater satisfaction and a lower rate of violent crime. Part of the reason for this is the fact that people on the top feel a sense of connection and responsibility towards those less fortunate, and the less fortunate feel more connected with those on the top. The case of Ethan Couch highlights what can happen when an individual does not have a sense of connection with the greater society. But the question is, why? My only knowledge of this case is what I have been able to gather from the news, and unfortunately that's often incomplete and at times inaccurate. With that said, the accounts in the media suggest that Ethan walked away from a horrific accident that he caused with an air of indifference, almost as if there was no concern for the individuals that he had harmed. If these accounts are true, it would suggest that he really had no emotional connection with his actions or the people that he had maimed. He was only concerned about his needs which at the time were to leave an unpleasant situation. The question to ask is why? Was this the genetics of a person with antisocial personality disorder? Was this due to the impact of the alcohol that he was drinking? Was this a disconnection from others and a sense of entitlement caused by never having to be accountable for his behavior? Or were there other factors at play? We'll never know, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to think that more than one of these elements were to blame for what appeared to be such a cold and callous behavior. Obviously, none of the above should exclude him from the law. What we're talking about is that some factors build a sense of self-responsibility and empathy, and they can be influenced, while others can't. So how do we build a sense of right and wrong in our children? In actuality, there are many ways. One way is by example. Our kids are looking towards us from day one to help them figure out how to navigate the world. How do we treat the people around us? Do we show the same level of respect for the customer service person at the Walmart as we do for our boss? Do we talk about right and wrong, and do we demonstrate these concepts by our own example? How do we approach our own children when they do something like bullying another child or stealing candy from the store? I remember talking to someone who was upset that they discovered that their child was stealing from their purse. This was the same person who would brag about placing an old broken appliance in a new box and returning it for a refund while keeping the new device. Is it any wonder that their child thought that it was okay to cheat the system? I also remember a teen that I treated many years ago. He was getting into progressively worse trouble. He was impulsive and very irresponsible. Each time that he would get into trouble, his parents would bail him out. Worse, they would often blame others for his behavior. He didn't do his schoolwork because he had terrible teachers. He was getting in trouble with the law because the police had it in for him. They were so good at making excuses for him that he felt no responsibility for his action. When he turned 16, his father told him that he was going to buy him a car. The father admitted that he always wanted to have a cool car when he was a teen but never got one. He was going to make sure that his son would get one. Despite my cautions, the boy got a very expensive and a very fast car, and within 2 weeks of getting it, he was arrested for going over 100 miles per hour down a quiet side street. Although the family once again tried to save him from his consequences, this time he didn't escape them. A simple solution turned into an eventual big problem. Unfortunately, the family dropped out of treatment shortly thereafter, but I would be curious to see how that young man was doing now 20 years later. I wonder if he had true friends. I wonder how he treated his wife, or if he was still irresponsible and entitled. As parents, we want to protect our kids from harm, and there are times that they are treated unjustly by people in authority. But we also need to be aware that the only way that they will learn from their mistakes is if they know that they have made mistakes. Constantly protecting them only teaches them that they are above the rules, which can make them feel not only entitled, but also disconnected from others. It's also a recipe for a sad and lonely life. With the power of the smartphone, we now see brutal beatings, hazings, and destruction of property, often filmed to give the perpetrator status or to further humiliate victims. Former NFL player Brian Holloway's vacation home was vandalized to the tune of $20,000. Many of the perpetrators posted photos on social media sites, which Mr. Holloway used to create his own website called HelpMeSave300.com. He had hoped that the teens would come forward and redeem themselves. You would think that horrified parents would bring their kids forward to make restitution. Instead, Mr. Holloway was met with anger and was even threatened a lawsuit, if you can believe it. You don't have to wonder about the message that those parents gave their teens, and the teens' actions suggested that this was likely not the first time that they had shown a disregard for others. Affluenza may be a bogus legal defense, but as members of society, we are responsible for each other. The parable of the Good Samaritan is just as valid today as it was 2,000 years ago. And thanks for listening to my personal opinion. Well, that's our show for today. Make sure you listen next month to Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. For more information about me, or if you have an interest in starting your own podcast, please go to my website at www.kunaland.com. That's KUNALAND.com. For more information about Genesis Clinical Services, you can go to that website at www.genesisclinicalservices.com. Remember, Genesis Clinical Services is all one word with no spaces. Lastly, if you'd like to send me an email, you can send me an email to psychiatricsecrets, all one word, at hotmail.com. Don't forget to tell your friends about this great show, and tune in next month.